Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight's story happens on a cold Christmas Eve, the kind where the city lights look warmer than they feel and every window glows with the promise of comfort. Snow was falling softly, turning sidewalks into quiet mirrors, and people hurried past with wrapped gifts and hopeful faces. Somewhere between the jingling bells and the distant carols, a man named Daniel Cross walked alone. Wearing a worn coat that hid more than just the cold from his skin, Daniel Cross was a billionaire, though no one who passed him that night would ever guess it. He was the founder of a global tech empire, a name whispered in boardrooms and printed in financial headlines. But on this Christmas, Daniel had chosen to be invisible. No driver, no tailored suit, no watch worth more than most cars. Just a plain coat, scuffed shoes, and a quiet decision to see the world as it really was when money stepped out of the way. For years, Daniel had lived surrounded by luxury but starved of sincerity. Every smile seemed calculated. Every introduction came with expectations, and every date felt like a transaction dressed up as romance. So when a charity board member jokingly suggested he try a blind date as a normal guy, Daniel surprised himself by saying yes. He would go as someone with nothing to offer but himself. No name recognition, no wealth, no safety net. The blind date was set at a modest cafe near the town square, decorated with pine garlands and tiny lights that flickered like brave little stars. Daniel arrived early, ordered a simple coffee, and waited. He rehearsed honesty in his mind, not about his wealth, but about his loneliness. He wondered if that would be enough. She arrived 10 minutes late, shaking snow from her coat, scanning the room with sharp eyes. Her name was Lauren. She was beautiful in a polished way, her hair perfectly styled, her coat unmistakably expensive. She sat down across from Daniel and smiled, but it was the kind of smile that checked boxes instead of opening doors. They exchanged pleasantries, and Daniel spoke carefully, truthfully, but selectively. He said he worked freelance, that money was tight, that he lived simply. The moment those words left his mouth, something shifted. Lauren's smile thinned, her eyes lost interest. She glanced at her phone more often, nodded without listening, and asked questions that felt like tests. When Daniel mentioned he didn't own a car and preferred public transport, she laughed, thinking it was a joke. When she realized it wasn't, the laughter stopped. She asked about his plans, his prospects, his ambitions, each question carrying an unspoken price tag. Daniel answered calmly, but the verdict was already written. Halfway through the date, Lauren checked her watch and sighed. She said she had another commitment, stood up, and wished him a polite but distant Merry Christmas. She didn't wait for his reply. The door closed behind her, and Daniel was left staring at his untouched coffee. The sound of carols, suddenly too loud. For a moment, the rejection stung more than he expected, not because he wanted Lauren, but because it confirmed something he feared, that without money, he was invisible, replaceable, unworthy of patience. He paid the bill and stepped back into the cold. The snow heavier now. The town square was alive with families, children laughing, couples holding hands. Daniel walked without direction, letting the crowd carry him. When he heard a small voice cut through the noise, "Mr. You dropped this," he turned to see a little girl, maybe 7 years old, holding his glove. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her hat too big for her head, slipping over one eye. She smiled with the unfiltered kindness only children seem to possess. Daniel thanked her and took the glove, but she didn't run off. She looked up at him curiously, then at his coat, then back at his face. "Are you okay?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. Adults rarely asked that without an agenda. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." The girl seemed to consider this, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a candy cane, slightly bent. The wrapper crinkled. "You can have this," she said. "It's Christmas, and you look like you need one." Daniel laughed softly, a real laugh that surprised even him. He accepted the candy cane as if it were something precious. "Thank you. That's very kind." Her mother called to her from a nearby bench, apologizing as she approached. She looked tired but warm, bundled in a simple coat, her eyes kind but guarded in the way of someone who'd learned life wasn't always gentle. "I'm sorry," the woman said. "She likes to talk to everyone." Daniel shook his head. "No need to apologize. She just made my night." The woman smiled, and something about it felt different from the smiles Daniel was used to. It wasn't impressed. It wasn't calculating. It was simply human. They talked for a few minutes. About the snow, the lights, the candy cane tradition her daughter insisted on sharing with strangers every Christmas. Her name was Emily. She worked as a librarian and volunteered at the local shelter. Life wasn't easy, she admitted, but it was honest. As they spoke, the little girl, whose name was Sophie, tugged on Daniel's sleeve. "Do you want to come see the tree?" she asked, pointing to the massive Christmas tree at the center of the square. Daniel looked at Emily, unsure. Emily smiled and shrugged. "She's very persuasive." They walked together to the tree, its lights reflecting in the snow, and Sophie insisted Daniel stand with them while she took a photo on Emily's phone. Afterward, Sophie looked at the picture and frowned. "You look sad," she said to Daniel. "But you don't have to be. Before Daniel could respond, Sophie reached up and hugged him. Not a polite hug, not a quick one, a full, tight embrace, as if she'd decided he needed it and that was that. In that moment, something cracked open inside Daniel. The loneliness he'd carried, the armor he'd built, all of it softened. He felt tears sting his eyes, and he didn't fight them. Emily noticed. She didn't comment. She just placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder and let the moment be. They spent the next hour together, walking through the square, sharing roasted chestnuts from a vendor, laughing at Sophie's dramatic retelling of her school Christmas play. Daniel forgot about the blind date, forgot about the rejection, forgot about pretending to be anything at all. Eventually, Emily mentioned they needed to head home. Daniel felt a surprising ache at the thought of saying goodbye. It was really nice meeting you, Emily said sincerely. Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Daniel replied. He knelt to Sophie's level. Thank you for the candy cane. Sophie grinned. You're welcome. And remember, even if people are mean, you're still important. Daniel watched them walk away, holding hands, their laughter fading into the crowd. He stood there long after, the candy cane melting slowly in his pocket, the warmth in his chest refusing to fade. That night, Daniel returned to his modest rented apartment, not the penthouse he owned downtown. He sat by the window and thought about everything he'd seen and felt. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to be seen. He felt the need to be better. The next morning, Christmas Day, Daniel made a decision. He contacted his foundation and redirected funds to the local shelter Emily volunteered at, doubling their annual budget. He arranged for anonymous donations to struggling families in the area. Not press releases, not headlines, just help. Days passed, and Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Emily and Sophie, not as a fantasy, but as a reminder of something real. He wanted to see them again, but he didn't want to complicate what had been so simple. Fate, however, had other plans. A week later, Daniel returned to the library, hoping to catch a glimpse. He found Emily shelving books, Sophie coloring at a small table nearby. When Sophie saw him, her face lit up like the Christmas tree. Mr. Candy Cane, she shouted, running over. Emily turned, surprised, then smiled when she recognized him. This time, the smile lingered. They talked again, longer this time. Coffee turned into lunch, lunch into walks. Daniel remained honest about who he was in spirit, but not in status. He wanted to know if what they were building existed beyond circumstances. Weeks later, when trust had grown naturally, Daniel finally told Emily the truth, not with grand gestures, but with quiet honesty. He expected shock, maybe anger. Emily listened, then nodded. I wondered, she admitted, but it didn't really matter. That answer meant more to Daniel than any acceptance he'd ever received. As for Lauren, the blind date, she later discovered who Daniel really was and tried to reconnect. Suddenly interested, suddenly apologetic, Daniel declined politely. He had learned the difference between being chosen and being valued. On the next Christmas Eve, 1 year later, Daniel stood in the town square again. This time, he wasn't alone. Emily stood beside him, Sophie between them, holding 2 candy canes, one for each of them. As the snow fell and the lights shimmered, Daniel realized something simple and profound. He hadn't needed to pretend to be poor to find out who people really were. He needed to be honest enough to let kindness find him. And sometimes, it takes a little girl with a candy cane to remind a billionaire of what truly matters.